The missile warning screamed in Captain Gianna Thompson's cockpit as two enemy fighters locked onto her from 6 o'clock. Her F-35's defensive systems were lighting up like a Christmas tree. 4 bogies on radar, all closing fast, all firing. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and according to every tactical manual ever written, completely screwed. "Falcon 2, you are defensive. Break right, break right." Her wingman's voice cracked with panic over the radio. The first missile passed so close she could see its exhaust trail through her canopy. The second detonated near enough that shrapnel peppered her aircraft's skin, sending warning lights cascading across her displays. She should have ejected. Every instinct screamed to pull the handle and abandon the dying aircraft. Instead, she smiled. Because Gianna Thompson had been waiting her entire career for someone to underestimate her this badly. The enemy pilots thought they had her. Command thought she was just another aviator who'd gotten lucky in training. Her own squadron still called her diversity hire behind her back, thinking she couldn't hear them. They were all about to learn the same lesson the hard way. What happened in the next 47 minutes would rewrite the rules of air combat, how one pilot went from defensive to offensive, from hunted to hunter, turning a certain death scenario into the most decisive air victory in modern warfare. How she shot down 8 enemy fighters, solo, using tactics that shouldn't have worked but did because she understood something her opponents didn't. But before we show you how she did the impossible, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because this story proves that the most dangerous pilot in the sky is often the one everyone underestimates. Now let's get into it. The briefing room at Al Dhafra Air Base was thick with tension. Colonel Marcus Hayes stood at the front, pointing to satellite imagery that showed a hostile airspace nightmare. The assembled pilots, 12 of the Air Force's best, studied the intel with varying degrees of concern. "This is bad," Hayes said bluntly. "Intel confirms enemy forces have deployed their elite fighter squadron to this sector. These aren't regular pilots. These are their best, graduates of their Top Gun program, flying Su-57s with advanced avionics and weapon systems that match or exceed our capabilities." Major Derek Blade Carlson, the squadron's golden boy with 17 air-to-air kills, leaned back in his chair. "With respect, sir, they're still flying Russian tech. We've got F-35s, superior sensors, superior stealth, superior everything." "That confidence is going to get someone killed," Hayes snapped. "These pilots have been training specifically to counter our tactics. They know our playbook. They've studied every engagement we've had for the past decade. Do not underestimate them." In the back row, Captain Gianna Thompson absorbed every word. She was the only woman in the room, the newest member of the squadron, and keenly aware that most of her fellow pilots thought she didn't belong there. She'd heard the whispers, seen the eye rolls when she entered a room, felt the subtle exclusion from the brotherhood that fighter pilots valued above almost everything else. "Thompson," Hayes called out, pulling her from her thoughts. "You're flying wing for Carlson tomorrow. Stay on his 6, follow his lead, and for God's sake, don't try to be a hero. These enemy pilots will eat you alive if you break formation." "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the condescension dripping from his tone. After the briefing, she headed to the hangar where her F-35, tail number 327, call sign Falcon 2, waited in its hardened shelter. She ran her hand along the aircraft's skin, checking panels and surfaces with the kind of attention most pilots reserved for pre-flight checklists. "Talking to your plane again, Diversity?" She turned to find Captain Brad Viper Morrison, one of Carlson's crew, smirking at her. The nickname had stuck since her first day in the squadron, a constant reminder that many of her peers believed she'd only made it through training because the Air Force needed to meet quotas. "Just making sure she's ready," Gianna replied evenly. "You should try it sometime instead of assuming your ground crew is infallible. Whatever, just try not to get Blade killed tomorrow when you freeze up under fire. Some of us actually belong in these cockpits." She watched him walk away, then returned her attention to her aircraft. What none of them knew, what her service record was classified too high for them to see, was that Gianna Thompson had more combat flight hours than the rest of the squadron combined. She'd flown missions in denied airspace that officially never happened, against enemies that officially didn't exist. She'd logged kills that would never appear in any public record. She'd requested the transfer to this squadron specifically because she'd heard they were the best. She wanted to fly with the best, to prove herself against the best. Instead, she'd found a boys' club that measured worth by bravado and dismissed her capabilities based on gender rather than skill. Tomorrow's mission would change that she could feel it. The next morning, 6 F-35s launched into pre-dawn darkness. Climbing through layers of clouds toward their patrol sector, Gianna flew in the number 2 position, maintaining perfect formation with Carlson's lead aircraft while the other 4 fighters spread out in supporting positions. Falcon flight, this is Overlord, the AWACS controller's voice crackled through their headsets. We have radar contacts bearing 030, range 100 miles, multiple bogies, looks like at least 6 targets vector to intercept, weapons tight until they cross the boundary. Copy Overlord, Carlson acknowledged. Falcon flight, arm weapons, maintain formation. Let's show these guys how we do business. They closed the distance quickly, their advanced sensors painting a picture of the enemy formation long before visual range. 6 Su-57s flying in a loose combat spread, confident, aggressive, looking for a fight. They see us, Gianna called out, watching her displays. They're maneuvering to engage. Stay tight, Falcon 2, Carlson ordered. We go in as a team. We come out as a team. Standard BVR engagement, Fox 3 on my mark. But as they approached weapons range, something felt wrong. Gianna's instincts, honed through dozens of real combat missions that officially never happened, were screaming warnings her conscious mind couldn't quite articulate. The enemy formation was too confident, too relaxed, like they were waiting for something. Falcon lead, I'm getting weird radar returns, she called out. Possible stealth contacts, multiple bearing. Falcon 2, maintain radio discipline. Carlson cut her off. Focus on the targets we can see. Falcon flight, Fox 3, Fox 3. 6 AIM-120 missiles leaped from their rails, streaking toward the enemy formation at Mach 4. But before they could impact, the tactical situation exploded into chaos. 4 additional Su-57s materialized on radar. They'd been running completely passive, invisible to conventional sensors, waiting for the American formation to commit to an attack. It was a trap. Break, break, someone screamed over the radio as the enemy fighters launched their own missiles. The sky filled with contrails and electronic warfare noise. As both sides went fully defensive, Gianna broke hard left as her threat warning went berserk. 2 missiles tracking her aircraft. She dispensed chaff and flares while pulling 9 Gs, the pressure suit inflating around her legs and torso to keep blood in her brain. The first missile bought the chaff, detonating harmlessly behind her. The second was more persistent. Through the chaos, she could hear her squadron fragmenting. Carlson was engaged with 3 fighters. Morrison was calling defensive. One of their birds had taken a hit and was trailing smoke. The careful formation had dissolved into a furball where individual pilot skill would determine who lived and who died. The second missile was still tracking. Gianna rolled inverted and pulled through, watching her altitude bleed away as she traded energy for survival. At the last second, she deployed flares and yanked the stick hard, pulling the F-35 through a turn that pushed the aircraft to its structural limits. The missile couldn't make the corner, detonating close enough to pepper her aircraft with shrapnel, but not close enough to kill. Falcon 2 is defensive, she called out, mainly for the benefit of the AWACS recording the engagement. What she didn't say was that defensive was exactly where she wanted to be. 2 Su-57s thought they had her. They were diving on her position, confident in their numerical advantage, probably already counting the kill. Gianna watched them come, calculating angles and closure rates with the part of her brain that had been doing this for years in places no one talked about. She let them get close, closer than any sane pilot would allow, watching their weapons envelopes, timing their shots. When the first fighter fired his cannon, she was already moving, rolling her aircraft through a flat scissors maneuver that reversed their geometry in seconds. Suddenly, she was behind him. Her targeting reticle settled over his aircraft like it was magnetized. She squeezed the trigger and felt the satisfying thump of an AIM-9X leaving the rail. The missile covered the short distance in seconds, and the Su-57 exploded into a fireball that she flew through, emerging on the other side to find the second enemy fighter trying desperately to bug out. "Fox 2, Splash 1, she reported calmly, as if she hadn't just pulled off a maneuver that would make flight instructors weep. The second Su-57 pilot was good. She'd give him that. He immediately went defensive, throwing his aircraft through a series of high G brakes while dispensing countermeasures. But Gianna had been doing this longer, against better pilots, in aircraft that didn't have the F-35 sensor fusion and targeting advantages. She stayed patient, matching his every move, waiting for the mistake she knew was coming. When he tried to climb, probably hoping to energy trap her into a stall, she took the shot, another AIM-9X, another fireball. "Fox 2, Splash 2, she called out. "Falcon 2 is back in the fight." That's when she heard Carlson's voice, strained with G-forces and stress. "I'm hit! I'm hit! Ejecting!" She whipped her head around, searching visually, and spotted the smoke trail from his aircraft arcing toward the ground. The parachute blossomed seconds later. He'd gotten out. But that meant command of the flight fell to whoever could take charge. "Falcon Flight, this is Falcon 2, she transmitted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done this before, many times. "Reform on me, defensive posture. We're going to fight our way out of this systematically." "Negative Falcon 2, Morrison cut in. "We're bugging out. This fight's over." "Belay that," Gianna snapped. "We've got a pilot on the ground and 6 enemy fighters between us and safety. We fight through or we die. Your choice, Viper." She didn't wait for acknowledgement. 3 enemy fighters were converging on Carlson's position. They'd seen the shoot and were probably calling in ground forces. Gianna pointed her nose at them and firewalled the throttle, accelerating to supersonic speed as she closed the distance. The lead, Su-57, never saw her coming. Her radar was in low probability of intercept mode, her F-35 stealth characteristics making her nearly invisible until she was already in weapons range. Fox 3, an AM-120 from 30 miles out, hitting the enemy fighter before he could react. "Splash 3, she reported, already maneuvering toward the next target. The remaining 2 fighters finally realized the hunter had become the hunted. They broke in opposite directions, standard defensive doctrine, trying to split her attention. But Gianna had trained for exactly this scenario in classified programs that stressed multi-target engagement and decision-making under pressure. She targeted the closer fighter with another AM-120, then immediately switched to her cannon, walking rounds toward the second target as both enemy pilots tried desperately to evade. The missile found the first fighter, shredding its left wing and sending it into an uncontrollable spin. The cannon rounds found the second, stitching across its fuselage until something critical exploded and the aircraft disintegrated. "Splash 4 and 5, Gianna transmitted, her voice steady despite her heart hammering at 180 beats per minute. "Carlson's position is clear. Falcon 3, you're closest. Maintain combat air patrol over his location until SAR arrives." "Roger that," came the response. One of her squadron mates was following her lead now, recognizing that she knew what she was doing. But the fight wasn't over. 3 more Su-57s were vectoring toward their position, and she could hear the AWACS controller warning of additional enemy fighters launching from their base. The tactical situation was still critical. "Falcon 2, Overlord," the AWACS called. "You are heavily outnumbered. Recommend immediate egress to friendly airspace." Gianna checked her fuel, her weapon status, her aircraft systems. Everything was still green. She'd used 4 missiles and some cannon rounds, but she still had teeth. And more importantly, she had an advantage these enemy pilots didn't know about. She knew how they thought. She'd trained against Russian doctrine for years. She knew their formations, their communications protocols, their preferred tactics. They were good, but they were predictable. "Overlord Falcon 2, negative on the egress. I'm going to keep them busy while the rest of my flight gets out. Falcon 2, do not engage. You are 1 aircraft against 3+ reinforcements. Understood, Falcon 2 engaging." She turned off the radio before anyone could order her to stand down, then rolled her aircraft and dove toward the deck, accelerating to military power as she planned her next move. The three Su-57s took the bait, following her down, probably thinking they could overwhelm her with numbers. What they didn't know was that low altitude, high speed, and cluttered radar background was exactly where Gianna Thompson excelled. She'd spent months flying nap-of-the-earth missions in denied airspace, threading through mountain valleys and urban canyons while hostile radars searched for her. These pilots thought they were hunting her. They were wrong. She leveled off at 500 feet, skimming over the desert terrain so fast that rocks and sand dunes blurred beneath her wings. The enemy fighters followed, spreading out to box her in, cutting off her escape routes, standard doctrine for a 3-on-1 engagement. Gianna waited until they were committed, until their geometry was set, until they thought they had her trapped. Then she popped up hard, climbing vertically at full afterburner, leaving the desert floor behind in a matter of seconds. The sudden maneuver confused their targeting solutions, buying her 3 precious seconds. She used them well. At the top of her climb, she rolled inverted and acquired the trailing Su-57 Fox II, an AIM-9X at close range, kinematic kill. The missile's seeker head tracked the enemy fighter's heat signature with perfect fidelity, and the warhead detonated close enough that the fragmentation pattern shredded the Su-57's control surfaces. "Splash 6, she called out, already diving back toward the deck, using gravity to regain the energy she'd spent in the climb. The remaining 2 fighters tried to bracket her, one high, one low, hoping to sandwich her between their weapons envelopes, classic Russian doctrine. Gianna broke the bracket by doing something insane. She flew straight at the lower fighter, closing head-to-head at a combined speed of over 1,400 miles per hour. They played chicken for 3 seconds. That felt like 3 hours. The enemy pilot's nerve broke first. He broke left, exposing his aircraft's profile. Gianna stitched him with cannon fire as she flashed past, close enough to see the pilot's helmet in her peripheral vision. "Splash 7, she reported, pulling hard to avoid flying into her own target's debris field 1 left. The final Su-57 pilot was either brave or stupid. Gianna couldn't tell which. Instead of running, he came after her, accepting a 1-on-1 engagement despite having watched her methodically dismantle his entire squadron. Maybe he thought he was better. Maybe he thought he could be the hero. Maybe he just didn't want to go home alone. It didn't matter. They merged at high speed, passing canopy to canopy close enough that Gianna could see the other pilot's eyes through his visor. Then the real dogfight began. A swirling, turning, high-G knife fight where split-second decisions meant the difference between victory and death. The enemy pilot was good, better than the others. He matched her turn for turn, forcing her to work for every advantage, never giving her a clean shot. They bled energy together, spiraling down from 20,000 feet to 10, then 5, then so low that Gianna could make out individual sand dunes beneath her wings. Her G-suit was inflating and deflating rhythmically. Her breathing was controlled through gritted teeth, and sweat was running down her face inside her helmet. This was pure stick and rudder flying, the kind that separated great pilots from good ones. She tried a high yo-yo, but he countered it. She attempted a barrel roll attack, but he saw it coming. Every trick in her playbook, he had an answer for. This pilot had studied American tactics as thoroughly as she'd studied Russian ones. So she stopped using American tactics. She executed a maneuver she'd learned from an Israeli instructor during a classified exchange program, a combination move that didn't appear in any official manual. She rolled inverted, pulled through while cutting throttle, then lit the afterburner while rolling back upright, creating a brief moment where her aircraft's energy state appeared to collapse before suddenly recovering. The enemy pilot took the bait, pulling hard to capitalize on what he thought was her mistake. But she'd recovered before he could get his nose around, and suddenly his aircraft was in her sights instead of the other way around. Final AIM-9X. No mistakes this time. The missile tracked true, and the Su-57 exploded in a spectacular fireball that lit up the desert sky. "Splash 8, Gianna transmitted, her voice hoarse from the sustained G-forces. "Falcon 2 is Winchester, returning to base." The radio erupted with transmissions, AWACS controllers confirming her kills, squadron mates expressing disbelief, headquarters demanding a full tactical debrief. She ignored most of it, focused on the simple task of flying her damaged aircraft home. The engagement had lasted 47 minutes from first shot to last, and she'd just done something that would be analyzed by air combat experts for years to come. She'd shot down 8 enemy fighters. Solo. Against odds that should have been impossible. When she landed back at Al Dhafra, the entire base seemed to be waiting on the flight line. As she taxied in, she could see ground crews staring, pilots gathered in groups, senior officers rushing toward her hardened shelter. She shut down the engines, went through her post-flight checklist with the same methodical precision she applied to everything, then popped the canopy. The heat of the desert afternoon hit her like a physical blow, but it was nothing compared to the heat of all those eyes watching her climb down from her aircraft. She removed her helmet, and her hair, which she kept regulation short, was plastered to her head with sweat. Colonel Hayes was the first to reach her, his expression unreadable. "Captain Thompson, you are to report to my office immediately for debriefing. Do not speak to anyone about this engagement until we've had a chance to review your gun camera footage and data recordings." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. But as she walked toward the operations building, she passed Morrison. He stood there, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. The cocky smirk was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect or might have been fear. She couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. They went through every second of the engagement, reviewing her decisions, her tactics, her weapons employment. Senior officers from the Pentagon joined via secure video conference. Intelligence analysts wanted to know everything about the enemy pilot's capabilities and tactics. Through it all, Gianna remained professional, answering questions with the same calm precision she'd shown in the cockpit. Yes, she'd engaged against orders. Yes, she'd taken unnecessary risks. Yes, she'd used tactics that weren't in the doctrine. And yes, she'd single-handedly eliminated an entire enemy fighter squadron that had been terrorizing Allied aircraft for months. When it was finally over, Colonel Hayes dismissed everyone else and closed the door, leaving just the two of them in his office. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I underestimated you. I let my biases color my judgment. That was wrong." "Yes, sir, it was," Gianna replied, too tired to sugarcoat it. Hayes actually smiled at that. "I've been reading your real service record, the classified one, the one that required a call to the Director of Operations at the Pentagon to access. You've been flying combat missions for 8 years. Real combat, in denied airspace, against peer adversaries. You have 43 confirmed kills that don't appear in any public record. You're not some diversity hire who got lucky. You're one of the most experienced combat pilots in the entire Air Force." "I never said I was just a diversity hire, sir. Other people said that." "Fair enough." He leaned back in his chair. "The question is, why are you here? Why request assignment to a regular squadron when you could be flying with the elite units that actually appreciate your capabilities?" Gianna considered her answer carefully. "Because I got tired of operating in the shadows, sir. I wanted to fly with regular units, prove that I belonged, show that being a woman didn't mean I couldn't hack it in a fighter squadron, I thought." She trailed off, then finished honestly. "I thought if I could prove myself here, it might open doors for other women who want to do this job." Hayes nodded slowly. "Well, you've certainly proven yourself. The gun camera footage is going to be classified, but the fact that you shot down 8 enemy fighters in a single engagement is going to leak. You're about to become famous, whether you want to be or not. I just want to keep flying, sir, and you will. But things are going to be different now. The Air Force is going to want to use you as an instructor, a mentor, maybe even a test pilot for the next generation of aircraft. You've demonstrated capabilities that very few pilots possess." Over the next few days, Gianna watched her world change. The squadron that had excluded her suddenly wanted to be her best friend. Pilots who'd mocked her now hung on her every word in briefings. Morrison actually apologized, though she suspected it was more about his career than genuine remorse. Carlson, recovered from his ejection with nothing but bruised pride, pulled her aside after a briefing. I need to say something, he started awkwardly. I was wrong about you. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. You saved my life out there. You saved all our lives. And you did it with flying skills I didn't think were possible. Thank you. You would have done the same for me, Gianna replied, though they both knew that probably wasn't true. Maybe not, he admitted, but I will from now on. You've earned that. The official after-action report praised her exceptional airmanship and tactical acumen under unprecedented combat conditions. The unofficial report, the one that circulated through fighter pilot channels and would be studied at every weapons school, analyzed her tactics in detail, breaking down how she'd turned a numerical disadvantage into a decisive victory. But the most significant change came from headquarters. The Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force himself called to offer her a position as an instructor at the weapons school, where she'd teach the next generation of fighter pilots the tactics and techniques that had kept her alive through dozens of combat missions. We need pilots like you passing on that knowledge, he told her over the secure video call. Not just the flying skills, but the mindset, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to make decisions in milliseconds, to see opportunities where others see only threats. Will you accept? Gianna thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, sir, on one condition. Name it. I still get to fly combat missions when needed. I'm not ready to be just an instructor yet. The Vice Chief smiled. I think we can arrange that, Captain Thompson. Or should I say, Major Thompson? Your promotion just came through. 6 months later, Gianna stood in front of a class of advanced fighter pilots at Nellis Air Force Base. They were the best of the best, carefully selected for their skills, their aptitude, their potential, and they were all watching her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Good morning, she began. I'm Major Gianna Thompson, and I'm going to teach you how to survive and win in air combat against peer adversaries. Some of you may have heard stories about me. Some of those stories are even true. But here's what I want you to understand from the start. I'm not special. Because I'm a woman in a fighter cockpit, I'm not special because I shot down 8 enemy fighters in one engagement. I'm special because I never stopped learning, never stopped improving, and never let anyone else's expectations limit what I knew I could achieve. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, showing gun camera footage from that engagement over the desert. Let's talk about what really happened that day and what you can learn from it. Because the day you stop learning is the day you become predictable. And in air combat, predictable means dead. As she taught, Gianna realized this was where she was meant to be, not proving herself to people who doubted her, not fighting for acceptance from those who would never fully give it, but here, passing on knowledge that would save lives, creating the next generation of pilots who would judge on merit rather than gender, who would see capability rather than stereotypes. The day's instruction covered everything from basic fighter maneuvers to complex multi-bogey engagements. Gianna shared lessons learned in combat, mistakes she'd made and survived, tactics that worked and ones that didn't. Her students absorbed it all, asking sharp questions, challenging her assumptions, proving they were worthy of the training they were receiving. During a break, one of the students, a young female lieutenant fresh from flight school, approached her hesitantly. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. How did you deal with, when people didn't take you seriously, when they thought you didn't belong, how did you handle that without letting it affect your performance? Gianna smiled, remembering her own struggles with the same questions. I used it as fuel. Every time someone doubted me, every time someone made a comment about diversity hires or questioned whether I could hack it, I let that motivate me to be better. Not to prove them wrong, their opinions didn't matter, but to prove to myself that I was as good as I believed I was. And if they still don't respect you after you've proven yourself, then that's their problem, not yours. You can't control what other people think or believe. You can only control your actions, your skills, your professionalism. Focus on being the best pilot you can be, and eventually the right people will notice the ones who don't. They're not worth your energy. The lieutenant nodded, clearly taking the words to heart. Thank you, ma'am. I needed to hear that. As the student walked away, Gianna reflected on how far she'd come from the classified missions that no one could know about, to the squadron that didn't want her, to the engagement that had changed everything. She'd gone from being underestimated and dismissed to being recognized as one of the Air Force's premier combat pilots. But the real victory wasn't the 8 kills or the promotion or the respect she'd finally earned. It was knowing that her actions had opened doors for others, that female pilots coming after her would face fewer doubts, fewer stereotypes, fewer assumptions that they couldn't handle the job. She'd changed the conversation, not through words or complaints or demands for equality, but through undeniable performance when it mattered most. That evening, back in her quarters, she reviewed footage from the day's training. Her students were good, really good. Some of them would probably surpass her capabilities eventually, and that thought made her smile. That was the whole point of teaching, after all, creating the next generation that would be even better than the current one. Her phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Hayes. Intelligence confirms that enemy nation has stood down its elite fighter squadron. Too many losses, including the 8 you took out. Whatever you did out there, it worked. Well done, Major. Gianna typed a brief reply, then set the phone aside. The mission was over. The engagement was won. But the real work, the work of changing a culture, of proving that capability had no gender, of inspiring the next generation, that work continued every single day. She looked at the photo on her desk, taken after her first solo flight years ago. Young, idealistic, full of dreams about flying fighters and serving her country. That version of herself would be proud of who she'd become, not because of the kills or the recognition, but because she'd stayed true to her principles while adapting to reality's challenges. Tomorrow she'd be back in the classroom, teaching the next group of pilots how to survive in combat. She'd share her knowledge freely, mentor those who wanted to learn, and continue building a legacy that extended beyond her own accomplishments. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the individual victories, but the lasting impact. Not the records she'd set, but the paths she'd cleared for others. Not the 8 enemy fighters she'd shot down, but the hundreds of pilots she'd helped train who would go on to protect their country with the skills and mindset she'd passed on to them. Major Gianna Thompson had proven she was one of the best fighter pilots in the world. Now she was dedicated to making sure she wasn't the last. The wolf didn't need to announce itself. Its record spoke loudly enough, and in the skies where life and death were decided in milliseconds, that record would echo for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.